We'll give you a moment just to consent to that, to the recording of this event. Okay. Here we go. All right. So with that, we're right at 50 participants. So I think that's a perfect time to get started, and let's maximize our time here. First, welcome. Hello, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and others in the Cal Maritime community. My name is Dr. Ian Wallace, and I'm a mental health counselor at Maritime since 2013. And today, I'm joined by my co-moderator, Cadet Jewel McLean, MET, class of 2021. We're excited to welcome you to the second event in our series, Conversations on Mental Health and Wellbeing, brought to you by the Mental Health Working Group at Cal Maritime. I'd like to extend a special thanks to my colleagues and event partners for their significant contributions helping organize and plan today's event. Ryan Rodriguez, Andrea Schneider, Angela Acosta, Benita Dillon, and Professors Betts McNee and Tamara Burback. Please note that this event is being recorded, so it may be available to the broader campus community. We appreciate the consent you provided earlier. And during the video call today, please keep yourself muted except when delivering applause, clarifying a question, or when otherwise prompted. With the event being recorded, please be mindful of your screen as well as other disclosures or contributions during the event. All right, to start, let me give an overview and then we'll jump into our presenters. Today's conversation, entitled Meet the Experts Supporting and Researching Mariners' Mental Health, will be an in-depth exploration and analysis and discussion of the current and pressing mental health topics and concerns that are relevant to seafarers, shipboard environments, and the maritime industry broadly. We've brought together two expert panelists with decades of experience to share their observations and recommendations. Revered David Rider is the former president and executive director of the Seaman's Church Institute of New York and New Jersey, who has presented on mariner mental health to cadets at other maritime academies, such as SUNY Maritime and Mass Maritime. And Martin Slade, MPH, is the director of research in the Yale Occupational and Environmental Medicine program and co-author of the seminal Seafarer Mental Health Study in 2019.
David and Marty will help us better understand timely and relevant areas of mariner mental health, including the mental health trends among mariners, variables in maritime contexts that contribute to well-being or distress, as well as things you can do right now to improve your and others' mental health and prevent the onset of mental health difficulties. In these difficult times of ongoing pandemic, political and racial unrest, as well as increasing mental health concerns among cadets and students across the country at Cal Maritime, we recognize the importance of convening with a conversation on today's topic. We hope that you come away from today's talk with greater knowledge of mental health trends in the maritime world, added sensitivity to your shipmates and to their often unseen mental health struggles, and lastly, greater conviction to take action to make your and others' maritime environments more supportive of mental health and well-being.
And before introducing our panelists and turning it over to them, let me briefly review the structure or schedule for our hour. First, we'll introduce each presenting panelist, followed by their opening remarks of approximately 10 minutes. After these remarks, Jewel and I will moderate a question and answer period, starting with our own selected questions. This will be followed by an audience Q&A. To submit a question for this segment, please use the chat function and send your questions and or comments to, or at any time during the event, directly to Jewel, who will collect and review them for the Q&A. In conclusion, we will share some brief reflections and remarks at the end of the hour.
Alrighty, so without further ado, we're pleased to introduce our first panelist, Revered David Rider. From 2007 to 2020, David M. Rider served as president and executive director of the Seaman's Church Institute of New York and New Jersey. I'll call it SCI for short. In this position, he led the staff of 30 with mission centers in New York City, Port Newark, Paducah, Kentucky, and Houston, Texas. Founded in 1834, SCI provides chaplaincy support to mariners in Port Newark and America's inland rivers, international seafarers' rights, and continuing maritime education. Prior to joining SCI, Mr. Rider worked for 20 years in medical and mental health administration, creating centers of excellence for evaluation and treatment of professionals in crisis. Some of these clinical professionals now support SCI's international project to create best practice guidelines for the evaluation and treatment of cross-cultural and multiple seafarers impacted by piracy, and more recently, assessment of mariner suicide risk. As part of SCI's Center of Seafarers' Rights work, Mr. Rider oversaw the release of a clinical study conducted by Mount Sinai School of Medicine's disaster psychiatry outreach involving 154 seafarers under both normal conditions of seafaring and extreme conditions of piracy captivity. Mr. Rider also participated in SCI's collaboration with the Yale University School of Medicine, Rutgers University School of Nursing, and Southern Illinois University to study unique health issues related to seafarers. Most recently, he became a credentialed applied suicide intervention skills training 2-day workshop leader and has facilitated 9 training cycles. Please give a warm welcome to David Rider.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like me to say a few words now? Oh, yeah,
Please do.
okay. Well, first of all, good morning. It's great to be with you. As that, I should have added in the bio that for 7 or 8 years, SCI oversaw the Seafarers Center in Oakland, California. So I was a near neighbor to you institutionally, and some of the cadets back then came down and were part of our work there. So I have a sense of that work there too. My whole pitch today, if you want to call it that, is going to be around our wellness and well-being. I think I bring 12 years of experience of face-to-face with seafarers from around the world, including US Jones Act seafarers, on their most routine days. We go aboard ships every day, say hello, see how things are going, and in some increasingly extreme conditions, man overboard situations, suicide risk, a lot of work historically on piracy and the like. So I have some feel about what can go wrong just because of our human condition, but how that is exacerbated in some ways when we're in the middle of the ocean, and how to care for ourselves in that context. I am not a prophet of doom and gloom. I am a big optimist, and I want to start out and emphasize that work in the maritime sector is awesome. You guys are teeing up for a great career. Maritime is one of the better careers you can find. Every career has its ups and downs. There are several unique structural challenges that we want to be real savvy about so that you navigate them. And everything I hope to contribute today, I want you to take on a 2-level input. One is for your own humanity as a young adult, your own well-being, your own human resilience, the building blocks of any young adult, exercise, stress moderation, psychosocial connection, all of those good things. And as you get fully into the maritime life, you're going to quickly take on leadership roles where people will be reporting to you, and you will be that leader who embodies all of the values that we want to talk about. And you will be responsible for the physical and mental well-being and welfare of those who are entrusted to your care. So I want you to be thinking about this in terms of your own self-care, but your increasing leadership role in the years ahead when you're taking on those responsibilities and modeling behavior, intervening when something's going wrong, and doing that in a very smart and compassionate way. So I think I'll hold a little bit of my other insights in terms of the increasing levels of routine stress from kind of diet aboard ship, routine cross-cultural stuff, deployment stresses that are part of the maritime life, the 24-hour work cycle, and then the increasing stresses and how we manage them. A punchline will be drills and skills. You're going to be involved in all kinds of drills and skills. Drills and skills do 2 things. They make you more competent and more confident when you are faced with those emergencies like a fire aboard ship or something else. And the same can be said explicitly for your mental health well-being, drills and skills, stress management, collegial kinds of encounters, culture aboard ship, those kinds of things. So as a kind of initial presentation, that's what I want to put out there and signal that I'm very happy to talk about. And Marty and I will kind of mix it up in our dialogue and of course be available for Q&A along the way. So thanks for having me today. Look forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. I'm sure that participants are really interested to get into the details of those drills and skills, and we'll certainly do that in our Q&A. But up next, occupational and public health expert and researcher Martin Slade. After a successful career in the aerospace sector, where as product development assurance manager for Allied Signal, now Honeywell, he oversaw the testing and evaluation of advanced gas turbine engines. Marty moved to academia. His faculty appointments at Yale University include lecturer in medicine and lecturer in public health. He is the director of research for Yale Occupational Environmental Medicine. Marty founded and is the director of Yale University Maritime Research Center. He is the Teaching and Learning Center Faculty Associate for Statistics and Medical Education at Yale University. He has also been on the Department of Defense Hearing Center for Excellence Pharmaceutical Interventions for Hearing Loss Advisory Board since its inception in 2012. Marty's focus has been on the development of study designs and analytical methods to evaluate occupational, environmental, psychosocial, and genetic determinants of disease, as well as the safety and efficacy of treatment. Recent activities have focused on the health and safety of workers in the maritime industry, both international and domestic, with a special interest in their mental health. He has authored well over 100 peer-reviewed articles. Please give a warm welcome to Martin Slade.
Thank you, Ian. It sounded impressive. I'm not sure it's all that. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me here with you. Delighted to be here. David gave a great opening remarks, and I don't know that I'm going to live up to David, but what I hope to discuss or bring out today has to do with what we learn and how we learn about the mental health in particular of seafarers. You can think of any individual seafarer as a combination of a lot of different interactions. You're born with certain genetics that may predispose you to be more anxious or not, or to be weaker or stronger in different aspects. When you're working on the ship, you're part of a team on the ship of other people. So how those people interact, that community, that local community matters, and it affects the culture on board the ship. It affects how everybody works with each other and the stresses on board. But it's not limited to that, because you work for some sort of shipping company and they have their own culture that permeates downward. And it's the interaction of all of these different things that create the culture on board that will allow you to more or less successfully deal with stresses that occur as they occur. Common stresses on board a ship, from my point of view, from a medical point of view, have to do with sleep deprivation and sleep cycles. It's a very, very important aspect of mental health. Other areas have just to do with risk that if you're going through a pirate area, just the idea that you're basically an invisible population to many people in countries, whereas we can drive down a road, at least in non-COVID times, and see people going to work in factories and see those factories and realize there's people there. But we don't see, as a general population, the seafarers. They're out at sea. When you come to port, you're behind locked fences. It's not like the old days where, if you read a book of 100 years ago, they came into the middle of the town or the city, and the seafarers came off the ship, and they had a few days before they had to go back out. And that whole model has changed, where you're basically on a ship, where many people are for more or less 9 months at a time, when in a cargo ship, for instance. So we can talk about all the different aspects of that and how the easiness, and maybe I'll get into the hardness of studying a seafarer population, because they are so independent and unobservable in so many ways.
Great. Thank you, Marty. Absolutely. From, you mentioned the local community to the importance of sleep, and then the difficulties or challenges studying kind of the unseen nature of the work. Yeah, I'm sure others are interested in hearing more about that too. Okay, thank you for those both opening remarks. At this time, The next portion of the event is our moderator question and answer, which Jewel and myself will lead. Again, please do submit your questions to Jewel. We'll get to those questions shortly. But to start off, and I'll take question number one for David and Marty. And you don't both have to answer. We can kind of be, spontaneous and flexible here. But I want to start off with a relatively serious and somber or sobering question, and it has to do with suicide. And this is related to your article, David, in the recent issue of the Proceedings from the United States Coast Guard, where part of the analysis showing higher suicide rates of brown water mariners compared to blue water suggests that people may be feeling disconnected from home life or life in general. A sense of hopelessness is there. What can we offer to others who we are concerned about as coworkers, partners, or even acquaintances? For instance, what suggestions do we give mariners or fellow cadets, people who do not feel they have a purpose or may feel hopeless? Take it from there.
Yeah, it's a big question and a critical question at all points of life, from young adult onward. All of us face different stressors in life, what are called acute stressors, one-off stressors, a bad day at work or whatever, and then the more chronic, as Marty said, even genetic stressors of depression or anxiety or whatever. Most of us manage those stressors in a reasonably uneventful way. We shake it off, we get some support, we hug a loved one, we make sense of it, and that's great. We want that, of course. For a number of different reasons, either because of our longer term vulnerability or because the acuteness of something that is overwhelming, such as isolation during COVID, loss of employment, those kinds of things that we know about, the kind of bandwidth that holds us together breaks down for whatever reason. And yet, for the most part, we keep those stressors to ourselves or one or two loved ones at most. So it's often called that the invisible disease, because we don't want to tell people, we're afraid of how they would respond, or they might crumble or overreact and the like. So it can build up and build up. And then we become potentially moving from a thought of suicide, and 10% of Americans and probably others cross-culturally have a thought of suicide every year. A thought of suicide in and of itself is not a huge deal, although we want to take it seriously. But when those thoughts start moving to detailed thoughts and behaviors, that it gets more serious and there needs to be an intervention. So my first pitch to your own wellness is, if you're having those thoughts, of course, to take them seriously and to get some professional support. At the Maritime Academy, you've got a quick phone call to Dr. Wallace and others to get that support. When you're out, in the maritime world, you might have to work at it a notch more to get that type of support with loved ones and the like. And also, and this is what the ASSIST course teaches, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, the most important thing is to acknowledge it and tell one other person. And if we're not the person at risk, to be available to see it in others, whether those others are loved ones, classmates, strangers, or otherwise. And here's a punchline. If you're concerned about someone else, and we can talk about what gets it to your concern level, always ask them, John, Jane, are you having thoughts about suicide? And be ready to non-anxiously hear them out. That is a lifesaver. And rarely, and we kill people with kindness because we fail to ask that question. So obviously we want to have our health and well-being as strong as it can be, to get all the upstream parts of life well connected, our family and community, psychosocial health, our physical and mental health, so that we are more resilient and agile when tough patches come our way. When they do come our way, we want to take them seriously and get help. To have a thought of suicide, or even to start towards a suicide behavior, does not mean we're going to take our lives if we get the right intervention. If it stays underground, under the rug, so to speak, it obviously becomes a bigger risk. And so we need to acknowledge that. So again, both for your own health and well-being, to take it seriously, to get the mental health support you need when the challenges are lesser before they become overwhelming. As, again, we're dealing with COVID and some other kind of high stressors in our cultural life, and there can be some in the maritime world that become high stressors it becomes a bigger challenge. Let me add one more paragraph on what's different regarding seafarers as opposed to any other randomly selected person in life. We're all human, we get that. When you are at sea, especially if you're out in the ocean as opposed to coast towing or river or whatever, everything is further away, including all of the supports. Whether you fear you're having a case of appendicitis or suicidal ideation, it is just more challenging, or a fracture. You know you have a fracture, you don't fear you have a fracture. When things go wrong, the resources are just further away. And so we need to name that on day one and plan for it. Now, shipping companies know that too, and they want to get it right. They don't want someone suffering or dying in the middle of the ocean. So they have every incentive and motivation to be helpful. The challenge of suicide is it's far more invisible than appendicitis or a fracture or some other medical complication, that where the bells will go off sooner and the resources will be brought to you sooner. Now, there's a whole nother conversation we may not be able to have time for, and that's called fitness for duty versus disclosing. We live in a HIPAA culture where our medical privacy is our privacy. We give up a lot of that HIPAA reality when we board ship. We must disclose pharmaceuticals, pharmaceuticals, and the like. And we must report to the master or her designee, second officer, the medical officer, from everything from gastritis to chest pains. So we lose that kind of medical privacy, and that you just have to get used to that. But again, in terms of suicide risk, how do we navigate at sea, whether we're the one at risk or we're supervising, leading someone who seems to be deteriorating in his or her mental health? And if you want, I can go into what those symptoms would be.
I'd like to jump in here to put a little bit of perspective from the ITF study that I think you've all been linked to. We found, in that study, we surveyed about 2,000 seafarers. I guess about 1,600 of them actually filled out the survey enough to analyze. There was about a 20% of those people that filled out the survey said that they had some form of suicide ideation in the past 2 weeks. That's a huge number. So this isn't a rare event. And as David said, it doesn't always mean there's an imminent disaster coming. But the thoughts are going through seafarers fairly at an alarming rate, quite honestly, I would say.
Oh, thank you, Marty, for sharing that. David, follow up.
In the human resource world, there's a saying that all employees bring their humanity to work. We all bring our pre-existing vulnerabilities to work, whether it's in an office and on a ship. And then that gets mixed up with the occupational context and environment, which puts some of us at more risk for loneliness, depression, stress and anxiety, those kinds of things. So you just, to thy own self be true, need to know who you are and when those triggers are getting pulled and how to get the support. One thing I forgot to mention, you may know this, more and more in maritime, there is telemedicine and even a psychological version of telemedicine where those support services can be relatively confidentially provided to seafarers at sea. That's telecommunications and email and all that technology stuff. But companies understand that those need to be there, whether they're medical emergencies or psychiatric emergencies.
I will jump in most companies.
Yeah, and getting better, US Jones Act companies, I think, are a whole lot better on average. And that's a whole discussion about what company are you going to work for, and a little bit of US culture versus third world culture and all that kind of stuff, Chinese companies and the like, in terms of how they think about employee relations.
Mm-hmm. Right. That sounds very relevant to cadets who might be evaluating kind of what companies to work for, especially when mental health and just health in general, is it prioritized or not? And that's a specific example. With that in mind, I did want to turn it over to Jewel, who's got another question that kind of gets at one of those triggers that can bring about mental health challenges at sea.
All right, so it appears that animosity between shipmates is just part of the normal culture. It's normal to vent and use foul language towards each other in an industrial workplace. And I'm wondering what you as experts think we can do to change this. How can we implement team building aboard ships? How do we make it a better place for women to work? So yeah, those are my questions.
You want to start there?
Marty, you want to go first this time or shall I?
I'll jump in. And then I think the largest thing that can be done, and again, the research data supports this, is that the culture of the company as it passes it down needs to be a positive culture. All the things such as bullying, such as antagonizing your shipmates, all kind of follows that culture. And the good part of that is culture can be changed. It's not like there's something inherent that can never be changed. If a corporation wants to change its culture, it can do it. It may take some time, but it can do it. It can have team building. It can do all sorts, and David would be much more familiar with these types of techniques, but team building exercises, some ways of understanding differences in people. It's not uncommon for blue water ships to have shipmates that are seafarers that are from various different countries, right? And you're all on a very small area of land in the middle of the ocean. And basically, I can foresee that there's stress associated, could be associated if I'm from the Ukraine and next door is someone from Russia. Well, we might not exactly see the world the same. I might have some stress, may not be real, it might just be perceived, but that's all that matters. And so there's lots of ways to try to build a coherent culture team so that people look out for each other as opposed to being bullying, which happens for sure, not just at sea, it happens everywhere, but in workplaces. But it seems to be much more problematic at sea because you are isolated. Dave.
As a maritime chaplain and overseeing them, again, we boarded and continue to board a dozen ships a day. So I've been on hundreds and hundreds of ships, sometimes only for an hour at a time. So I've seen a whole lot of culture. And just like when you walk into a restaurant, you know if this is a cool place or a dirty place and a grungy place, and you can pick up the vibes very quickly. And it's true of maritime too. So when you report to a ship, you'll get a feel for it very quickly. In the best case scenario, the master, the captain, is totally on top of this. And actually, I've spent a lot of time and have interviewed dozens to over 100 captains about how they see this very topic. As Marty said, the buck stops at at the leadership corporately on one level, but of course at the captain aboard ship. The best captains and officers are aware of this. They have they're skilled in looking out for isolation or other kinds of challenges. Cross culture, unless you're on a U.S. Jones Act ship, cross culture is a big deal. And the risk of being a minority, ethnically speaking, the one Ukrainian on a ship full of Russians and all that mix and match of ethnicity, insider, outsider, diet, recreation, ways of expressing anger, language, sensitivity, and all that. So the cultural stuff is very real. The best captains that I've listened to think of ways to have recreation aboard ships, special Saturday night dinners, even some games. This is a little pre-COVID. They're trying to figure it out in the newest world, but ways where there's so-called group cohesion. So that's a good buzzword to think about, group cohesion. How are you a part of it even on campus life? And how do you promote it when you're in a leadership role so that you are drawing out people who might be a little bit more otherwise in the shadows and the like? The other thing that, two real important and maybe obvious things to mention, shipboard life is 24/7. In a regular world, you go home at 5 o'clock, so to speak, and can shake it off. At aboard ship, you are on a vibrating metal, massive vessel for weeks to months at a time. Actually, we talked to yesterday, I talked to some physicians in Hamburg who have done a lot of medical research, and they picked them up on the theme of high blood pressure that they did not expect. Even among younger and apparently healthy looking people. And one of their hypotheses is vibration. If you are vibrating 24/7, after a while, you start to take it in and you can feel it. So, that's just an occupational risk. And of course, longevity and deployments. You will have choices when you start into the full-time sector about international maritime versus Jones Act, tugs, ferry vessels, and the like. Beyond their compensation and other perks, they each have deployment cycles. Deployment cycles are a big deal. One of the issues, to jump into the river suicide topic for just a moment, my hypothesis was that river mariners work basically 28 days on, 28 days off. What we saw was going from a high 2-watch structure, 28 days on, where you didn't have time to ruminate and feel sorry for yourself and get depressed and stuff, to going home for 28 days, where there was almost zero structure and all the family demons that were there and the like. The suicide risks happen almost invariably in the first 72 hours or the last 72 hours between deployment transitions. Now that's going to be different, of course, with 9 months as opposed to 28 days. So take seriously what deployment gig you're getting into and how both your physicality, exercise, food, sleep, and rest, and mental health are affected by going on and off the job. Tugboat workers in New York Harbor have 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That's a very different rhythm of just getting back and forth between work and home life. But it's going to have some consequences in terms of just the way we feel about ourselves and the world.
Wonderful.
Lost track of the question. What was the question?
No, that seemed like a wonderful addition. It's okay to take it in what comes to mind. Jewel, I think you had the next question.
Yeah, so, you've kind of mentioned a few things about this already, but what do we do if we're having a crisis at sea? Are there any policies for specific companies to protect us while we're at sea if we're having a crisis of any sort? Yeah. So what are the first steps we should take?
David, start because you're used to being on board.
Well, let's be honest and careful here. You're a transportation worker, whether you're a seafarer or an aviation pilot. The so-called phrase fitness for duty becomes a big deal. And that has to be, we just have to put it out there and then recognize that some of us try to sashay around that a little bit on a bad day and underrepresent the things that are going on because we need to earn a living and need to report to work and the like. So there's an important tension between sharing what's going on a bad day and need for help with the need to get the resources that we need. Telemedicine can help with a little bit with that, but it's not 100% HIPAA guaranteed, so to speak. And if one is in a suicidal state, for example, to use an extreme situation, the company may need to take you off the ship. In the company's view, that's a $100,000 deal for a ship to divert for any reason off of its course. Costs about $100,000, extra tug fees, lost time at sea, all that kind of, it's a big deal. It happens if there's a medical emergency or a psychiatric emergency, but we're into some real complexity about how that's done if a person is at higher risk and kind of losing it, so to speak. So I don't want to be romanticized or otherwise to say, if I'm feeling blue, I can tell the captain and he'll understand. It's going to be a more complicated filter system in terms of how your needs are met versus the ship's needs and frankly, your safety to yourself and others. We can delve into that more if you want, but obviously, before we deploy, having our life and our act together as much as possible, getting the kind of therapeutic or other support that we need, having trust maybe with peers on the ship, but again, there's some kind of ethical quandaries there if one peer shares them to another that they're having suicide risks. Remember, without dwelling on suicide, when you get into that world, we're talking about access to lethal means. In America and with males and on the river system, it almost always means guns. At sea, it's called the side of the ship and water. Many, many man overboard situations are ambiguous. And that's just a big bucket of complexity. If you want to go there, we can, in terms of what happened there. Punchline is to try to upstream have our mental health selves in as good a shape as possible. And increasingly, as I think as Marty said, there is telecommunication aboard ships, the email, the FaceTime, those kinds of things, where our loved ones and other trusted people who are outside of the reporting loop are a part of keeping us healthy.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really important part, and the telecommunications adds so much help, especially because not every captain or his designee that's responsible for the medical well-being of the people on the ship are, so shall we say, equally knowledgeable of what different symptoms mean, how important is it, should I take this really seriously or not. I mean, if you think from moving away from mental health and someone has some chest pain, is this a heart attack or is this just a little bit of stress? Not that to minimize it, but do I need to divert? Do I need to get a helicopter out here? Whatever. And those decisions, as David mentioned, are very tough because they all mean different amounts of money and different amounts of time in delivery. And so it's not a simple solution. And even on board, not all ships have all the medicines that they might need to use, even if they make an accurate diagnosis, maybe through telemedicine with someone helping, a physician on land. And then they go to the cabinet and realize they have absolutely no medicine to help with that. So another issue that I've always had is I'm curious how to make sure that stock is A, correct, and B, filled. And one area of research we've started on a little bit, I don't know if you knew this, David, is trying to obtain pre-employment physicals, the things that decide that you're fit for duty, and try to then, when you come on board, this is what we know about you. Is some of those conditions or mixture of conditions, does that lead to a higher probability of some particular type of crisis on board? And if so, what would we want on board for that crisis? So that not to exclude sailors or people from mariners being on board, but to make sure we have what they need on board. And so that is early research, but if we can predict what is the higher risk issues, I think we can help a lot of people.
You have a double accountability as a seafarer. One is to your company and the captain as the company's representative when you deploy to the ship. The other is to the U.S. Coast Guard. And in terms of your licensure and medication issues, drug and alcohol issues, depression issues, diabetes, sleep apnea, other kinds of things, the Coast Guard has a big deal interest in that. And again, in terms of certifying fitness for duty. And the Coast Guard will work with people. Sleep apnea is a big hot thing right now. We're working with people to get that right, but you get on a shorter leash when those are issues, and there's going to be more medical evaluations and those kinds of things for your own sake, but again, for the vessel's sake, to make sure you're not a risk to yourself and others.
Thank you both for those contributions. I can just add from the training ship preparation from the Student Health Center, that model of trying to anticipate and provide services that are available has been kind of our mindset as far as I've worked here in terms of stocking the small pharmacy that we have and the medications or other types of mental health needs, having a counselor on board the training ship for the past 7 years. Those are some of the ways we go. I'm going to link to share with the group broadly some of the additional articles, but at this point, I think it's a good time to turn over to some of our participant questions. And Jewel, if you could kind of kick that off.
Yes, so first one that came in was, is there a specific work schedule cycle that has been shown to be the most supportive of mariner health?
Well, I'll start. As I understand it, there are various cycles of work that could be 4 on, 4 off, through 12 on, 12 off. Very fundamentally, anything that gets in the way with your circadian rhythm, meaning that you really need to get 8 hours or close to that of uninterrupted sleep, is going to cause negative stresses in the body, especially over time. And so I don't know what the best is, but I can tell you the ones that get in the way of that are probably the worst.
Is there any actions being taken? I'm sorry, I interrupted. I'm just wondering, are there any actions taken to change this, to make like a more...
We get suggestions for what it's worth in reports and talking to ship owners. Not sure how well they implement those changes. It appears to me there's long-standing tradition, and maybe for other reasons, as to why people have certain shifts lengths.
We've done a lot of work on crew endurance management, and that's a buzzword about how do you get into the right circadian rhythms? How can you learn to fall asleep, for example? Well, hey, we're tired, we go to bed, that's easy. But if you're on a 2-watch system on the Mississippi River, you have 6 hours off and 6 hours on twice every 24 hours. You don't have 6 hours and 5 minutes. So Marty's goal of 8 hours will never happen. If you have 6 hours, you have to brush your teeth, call home, eat, wash your clothes and everything else. You better know how to fall asleep because you are now a health risk if you didn't get a good night's sleep before you come on duty. There are ways to help train people, as kind of funny as it sounds, under stress to relax. Meditation, deep breathing, whatever it takes to help us let go and go to sleep, especially if the bad weather and other things are happening to disturb that, that's a big deal. It's obviously important in terms of what career opportunities you choose. Are you going to be on a 3-watch, 6-month contract at sea, going through hurricanes occasionally or other kinds of challenges? Are you going to be on a 2-week on, 2-week off watch as a harbor tug pilot, which is very different? Are you going to be a ferry pilot or wheelhouse where you may go home every night? The Staten Island ferry, those guys go home every night, no big deal. So you have some choices, and that's not the only reason you're going to pick a particular sector, but it is part of what is the lifestyle and what will keep me healthy over the long haul, not only for sleep, but for family, psychosocial, exercise, diet. And again, can't underemphasize cross-cultural. We're talking about how do I get support? We Americans wear our therapeutic hearts on our sleeves. We'll tell anyone, how much we're hurting and suffering and Oprah Winfrey kind of style. You get a Ukrainian ship captain, he's not going to want to hear all that stuff. He's going to basically tell you to suck it up and get back to work. At the risk of stereotyping, there are different kinds of cultural expectations about how we share all of that stuff and how that's shared aboard ship. So again, that's part of the decisions you make about where you want to deploy.
Just as a possible something of interest, that circadian rhythm, the idea of the 24-hour clock that's embedded in us, is hardwired. A while back, the US Navy and their submarines, which are always under the water, you can't see the sun, decided to change the day to 16 hours, that every 16 hours was a new day. And thinking that you have 8 on, 8 off, 8 on, 8 off, and it screwed up all of their sailors. Just so you know, they went back to a 24-hour clock.
Hospital workers have this if they shift, from the day shift to the night shift, risk of accidents, risk of higher health kinds of issues, those types of things. And it's just part of the 24/7 reality of maritime.
Yeah.
So another audience question, can we speak more to supporting less represented groups such as women on ships?
WISTA, Women in Shipping and Transportation, is a big professional group that does a lot of good work. I've had some of the academy talks about recruiting. I've been part of them, not lead them, but listen to, Maritime Academy presidents trying to think through recruitment of women and the like. One of their big takeaways is that women do better when they see more women as both mentors and peers. No surprise at all. So having a critical mass of other women around you is good, both for your own kind of well-being, but also for the larger culture of the whatever the workspace is. Companies promise to work on that, and some do a better job than others. So that gets to corporate culture and leadership. I'm obviously a man. I can't speak in a deeper existential way to that. Again, going on lots of different ships, don't see as many women as we would hope. Cruise ships have more on average for a bunch of different reasons. They have their own pluses and minuses as a career opportunity. That's my kind of limited take on that. Marty?
Yeah, the limited number of females on ships today causes havoc with trying to understand differences in gender as far as exposures on a ship and culture on a ship and how it affects women differently than men, because there's just, quite honestly, not enough of a sample size to really get deep statistics out of. We could talk to the women on board and try to understand from a qualitative nature what affects them differently. But I tend to think back at work I've done in the past on land factories, land industries, Alcoa Corporation, for instance. And there we found that in the subgroups, so in the job groups that, so maybe 8, 10, 12 people that had more than one woman in it, women did much better with regard to reducing their injury rate, their illness days. And it seems to be that there's that critical mass, as David mentioned, but some sort of support structure that understands me a little bit more than the guys around me. And so until we get a high representation of women on board, we're going to have some issues, I think.
I assume all of you have had to go through some kind of bullying and harassment prevention training as part of your undergraduate preparation. I don't know that for sure. That's obviously part of our larger culture that we're working on. Maritime, as opposed to other sectors, you can be optimistic or pessimistic about it. The other challenge of maritime is it is global, it is international. And again, unless you're working on a Jones Act ship with just American crew, when you're getting into the larger maritime scene, which many of you will, which is wonderful, I don't want to make any aspersions, you're just dealing with cultural issues, and obviously gender and those kinds of things are culturally determined a lot. And we can't be naive as Americans in assuming that other parts of the world see life, suffering, sexuality, authority, all that kind of stuff in the same way that we do.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that question came up. And I actually wanted to ask you, Jewel, if, from your experience as a cadet, if you wanted to share any thoughts here. I mean, I certainly could chime in a little bit, but wanted to offer you that opportunity.
You know, I'm not having anything come to mind when you're saying anti-bullying training, especially on the ship. Didn't experience any of that. I did experience, we did have a lot of drills. I thought was really interesting in the SCI article, or the American Club article, recommends that we implement that as part of our trainings as anti-bullying harassment on board the ships. And I think that's a good idea.
The challenge of bullying and harassment in maritime, as opposed to just no one wants it anywhere. The problem again is in the middle of the ocean, you're a long way from the normal resources. If you're getting that in a normal kind of office culture, you can go home to spouse, to family, to support systems, to HR, and a bunch of other things and kind of deal with it. In the middle of the ocean, you're literally in this 24/7, vessel, and it's just more challenging. Close quarters, the crew, at least from port to port, unless there's a staff change of some kind, deployment change, it's just you're further from the normal resources.
So just
and there's higher risk of isolation.
Oh, go ahead.
An interesting story I heard from a captain once, years earlier when he was an officer, but not the captain yet. And apparently whatever ship this was allowed drinking, and most of the crew had gotten drunk one night and decided they didn't like one of the crew members and were deciding that they should throw him overboard. And he was very distressed, obviously, but he also realized he was very outnumbered. And so, in a very wise move, decided to join with the group and say, yes, but if we're going to do this, we must do this in a way that is consistent with the history of the sea. We can only throw somebody overboard at dawn, and they must walk this plank at dawn. The whole point being he was buying 6 hours for them to sober up so that he could then talk them out of doing this, which he ultimately did. But you are a million miles from what we could do on land when you're out at sea is kind of the point of that story.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to like some of the points that jump out to me here is the importance of critical mass. And that's true here on campus too, especially when we think about female cadets, non-binary identified cadets, and just how the vulnerabilities are so much more apparent. And we see that in some of our data here and some of my work as counseling. But even if that doesn't take hold, there are steps to assess kind of the cultural norms, the leadership, how inclusive it is there team building, is there enforcement and accountability of the anti-bullying and anti-harassment. So I just want to speak to cadets here as you're evaluating kind of your future career, that look at these companies with these thoughts in mind, especially if you may be in a position or have identities that you feel are more vulnerable, whether it's gender, race, or otherwise. So we just have a few minutes left, and I don't want to forget, because in Mayo Hall, I've got a note, there's a lot of burritos, so feel free to make your way if you're on campus. ASCMA, thank you very much for supporting this event and offering that opportunity. But we do have a couple minutes. So Jewel, I wasn't sure if there were other questions from the audience.
So we're going to take advantage of your guys' insider information and ask, which company should we work for? Which have the most supportive policies for mental mariner health?
Do I get a referral fee?
Or something.
But the Seaman's Church Institute has really great corporate maritime support. So I know a lot of the CEOs of a lot of the companies on a first name basis. I don't want to trade those names in a kind of a cavalier way. I think the first thing you want to think about is you want to be in the Jones Act American cultural world, which, on average, obviously each place is different, but on average is going to have some sensitivity to these very topics that we are discussing. And again, at the risk of stereotype, you want to be a part of companies that are from other parts of the world corporately. Of course, companies are all over the world. That's the nature of shipping. But what's the kind of the company ethos and culture? I would definitely, if you get closer to a higher decision or being higher decision, talk to other women, especially if you're a woman. What's this company like for women? How do they think about these sensitive issues? And if their body language gives you bad vibes, take that seriously. If they are, able to share really smart, helpful stuff, well, of course, take that under advisement. But like any job search, sniff around that corporate culture and try to find out through normal kinds of ways, what's it like in this company? What are their health policies? What are their bereavement policies or emergency repatriation policies, bullying and harassment training, beyond lip service, those kinds of things. And I think you're going to be in a better place when you make those decisions.
And I would add one thing, if you can also get a sense of their turnover rate.
Yeah.
If people are staying in the company for longer periods of time, it's more likely than not a better company to work for. And there's certain companies that will have a very high turnover rate and just don't care. They're looking at people more as resources.
Having celebrated the Jones Act world, I would say on average, and again, risk of stereotype, a lot of the Northern European companies, we saw this big league in the piracy kind of rough days, and the Maersks and others of the world really have a wonderful, healthy paternalism, at the risk of using that word, in terms of the well-being of crews and the support they need. Other cultures and parts of the world just see that in a different way, as kind of a headache at best. So be thinking about, where's that company corporately headquartered, in what part of the world? How do you understand that part of the world? And as Marty said at the outset, how is that going to trickle down from the corporate level to the deck plate level in terms of human priorities and how it works? That's what I would say.
Great. And just one final question in brief, if you could summarize kind of what's on the horizon for both of you, for the maritime industry, as it pertains to mariner mental health, whether it's research or programs or other things that you see coming up.
I'll start. So I think research is key. We don't know what to do until we understand the problem, the causes, and potential interventions that work. So I do think that's really important. From my end, what I would love to see is greater participation of ship owners and I guess manning agents to allow the use of some of their information so we can look at people longitudinally over time. I mean, a 9-month window is not very long, but if I understand what goes on in their lifetime over 10 years, 5 years, whatever, I can do a lot better modeling and predicting. So I think that's important and probably coming, because as with everything else, records are becoming more electronic. And so it's just a matter of deciding they allow it and making sure the country allows legally for that data to be shared. Another thing, I think telemedicine, which we've been pushing for 8 years that I know of from Yale into the maritime world, and have always gotten pushback to some small or large degree. Because of COVID, as bad as that is, it turned telemedicine on almost overnight. On land, telemedicine is the way of the world right now at Yale for many of the practices. And so I think that will transfer rather quickly to the maritime world.
I'm an optimist, as I said at the outset, and the companies that I've worked with, and again, these are large, the Cargills, the large U.S. players. The good news is they understand the buzzword being human factors. We're having a human factors discussion today about everything from sleep and circadian rhythms to exercise and mental health and the like. They understand that healthy mariners are safer mariners, have more longevity rather in terms of deployment. And so they're more and more concerned and willing to do things like making sure there's email and telecommunications in a routine way on ships, where 10 years ago that wasn't so much the case, and other kind of humanitarian parts of it. So I'm an optimist on that level. So issues of mental health are hot right now. The Coast Guard Medical Advisory Committee is taking them more seriously in both ways, more accountability, but more support. So the topic we're having right now is a very timely topic. I've had versions of this in the maritime corporate world at least a dozen times in the last 4 or 5 years at major international conferences and the like. So the CEOs and HR and other leaders of those worlds are taking that more and more seriously, and that's good.
Wonderful. Thank you both for those closing remarks. And let me just, as we wrap up here, I want to share some resources. I know the previous readings can elaborate on some of the things you just mentioned there, but let me also share now just some mental health resources, both here on campus and elsewhere, that participants can check out and use. But to close, this has really been a wonderful and informative, insightful hour. And I'd like to thank again our guests for taking the time to be with us and sharing their expertise. Again, David Rider, former president and executive director of the Seaman's Church Institute of New York and New Jersey, and Martin Slade, director of research in the Yale Occupational Environmental Medicine program. Again, thank you both so much. For more information and further reading, again, check out the resources provided. I'll put the contact information, emails for Marty and David as well. Please join us again, everybody, in the spring semester when our conversations on mental health and well-being series continues. Invited guest speakers will include representatives from the maritime industry and workforce, with topics focused on preparing for commercial crews and life at sea. If you'd like to be involved with the series or would like further information, you may reach out to me, Dr. Ian Wallace, iwallace@csum.edu, or Cadet Jewel McLean, jmclean7364 at csum.edu. Our information is also posted in the chat, and thank you again for attending. Hope you all have a good rest of the day and appreciate you being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.